but if you don't mind running at medium to high settings, a GTX 1080 or even at a push an RX 480 can still do a fairly good job between 30 and 60 FPS. The next myth I want to cover is actually a bit of an interesting one, and that is that consoles play at 4K. Now I want to make it clear, at the time of filming the Xbox Scorpio isn't out yet, so I can't comment on that, I can't comment on how much it's going to cost or anything like that, and the benefit that you might receive for owning one, but I can talk about the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One S. Now the Xbox One S does output at 4K when you're playing stuff like 4K Blu-rays and that sort of thing, so if you do want to watch 4K Blu-rays and 4K Netflix and that sort of stuff, you can do that on that sort of system, but this will not be playing games at 4K. If it does actually output to a 4K TV, it will be upscaling, which means that you get no noticeable difference because you are literally just mapping each one of the pixels across the 1080p that you're rendering, if even 1080p, to 4 of the pixels on the screen, so it looks exactly the same. The PS4 Pro uses quite a lot of trickery to render its 4K images, mostly using the dynamic resolution, which means that the resolution actually depends on what you're seeing, what you're doing in the game. If it's a low action, low movement type of scenario, especially stuff like cutscenes, you're likely going to be seeing a properly rendered 4K image. If, however, you're playing in a high action environment or even stuff like racing games, you're likely going to be seeing a 1080p or even less image that has been upscaled and a few other trickery parts added, stuff like checkerboard rendering, to be able to render it slightly higher than 1080p to make it look a lot better than the standard PS4. But to make it clear, if you want your high action, high intensity video games to be played at 4K at 60 FPS, then you're not going to be getting that on a PS4 Pro, even with its boost mode. The next thing is something that I've received in comments quite a few times, and I want to address this quite clearly. The main idea for this is that when you turn your 4K screen down to 1080p, you should be able to therefore run it at least 120, if not 240 Hz, right? No, I'm afraid that's not how it works. I think I understand where it comes from, where we talk about resolution and refresh rate as almost this intertwined thing, 4K 60 Hz or 1080p 60 or 1080p 144 Hz, all this sort of stuff, but if you actually understand how liquid crystal panels work and that sort of thing, then that just doesn't make much sense. So the way that LCD panels actually work is they're made up of multiple layers, and each pixel is made up of 3 elements, a red, a green and a blue element, and they also have the liquid crystal section in the back to limit the amount of light that comes through them, as well as the amount of red, green and blue that they actually display. This means no matter what resolution you try and push to the monitor, you will always have the same amount of pixels actually on the screen. So for example, if you're trying to push a 1080p image to a 4K monitor, each 1 pixel that you push to the monitor will be displayed across 4 pixels, effectively just duplicated, so that the image still looks decent, but at the same time you're obviously still displaying on the same number of pixels, you're just multiplying what you actually show on them. The refresh rate is mostly controlled by the circuitry on the back of the monitor, and this means that no matter what resolution you try and push to it, you can't just run it at a higher refresh rate. The next and final myth slash debate topic is that 4K just isn't worth it. This is quite a debatable topic and often comes down to personal preference on how far you sit from your monitor, what sort of games you play, and also if you're willing to give up some of the additional features that you can get at lower resolutions at this point in time. Stuff like 120 or 144 Hz, which I understand there is an ASUS 120 Hz monitor, but that is also ludicrously expensive, so that is something to be aware of. Now for me personally, I don't game at 4K. I have 3 1080p monitors on a monitor arm, and that works perfectly well for me, especially because I also use that PC for video editing and that sort of thing. So me personally, I think if I did have another 4K monitor, because this one is my benchmarking monitor, the testing monitor, I'd probably still game at 4K if I could. I mean, I have a GTX 1080, so it's not too much of a problem for me, but at the same time, I don't necessarily recommend it to everyone, just because, especially the sort of trade-offs at the price points that the monitors are currently at, stuff like the AOC G2460 PF is I think about £100 cheaper than this monitor, so a fantastic 144Hz FreeSync 1080p monitor is about £100 cheaper than a 4K 60Hz FreeSync monitor. Which again, it just differs in what you're after here and what sort of games you play as well. So I think that kind of concludes my myth busting session. If you got any other myths or just opinions on what we've spoken about here, then feel free to let me know in the comments down below. I love having a conversation with you about these things. Of course, this is still a two-way street, so let me know in the comments down below if you got any other thoughts for me. Also, feel free to like the video, subscribe, and of course, if you enjoyed it, found it useful, informative, or anything else, then feel free to share the video, whether that's on Reddit or tech forums or Facebook or Twitter, whatever you found fancy, just share it as soon as you can. That'd be awesome. And otherwise, yeah, I guess that's kind of that really. If you want to check out any of the monitors, 4K monitors, anything like that, feel free to check out the links in the description down below. And if you're buying anything on Overclockers UK or on Amazon, it'd be awesome if you use my affiliate links. It genuinely helps me out. It's keeping the lights on, it's supporting the channel, it's supporting me, and all that good stuff. So if you could use those, that'd be awesome. And otherwise, yeah, I guess that's kind of that really. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Check out some of the other videos that I'll leave over here for you, and of course the subscribe button over more on this side. I'll probably have to move it down here, but either way, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you all in the next video. Asus sent over the Crosshair 6 Hero board. It's one of their higher end AM4 X370 motherboards, and we're going to take a look at it in this video, so do stick around. Now, as with the Gigabyte motherboard that I reviewed yesterday, the first thing you're going to notice is the new AM4 socket. This is a PGA socket, or pin grid array, and has 1,331 pins in it, making it a few hundred pins extra over the last AM3 socket. The board itself features fairly similar styling to their Z270 Hero board, with the only main difference really being that CPU socket in the middle, and especially the mounting hardware that surrounds it. The holes that actually are in the motherboard are, for this specific model, very interesting because you actually have two holes that are right next to each other. These holes are for either AM3 or AM4 mounting hardware, which means if you buy this motherboard you don't have to care what your CPU cooler supports. As long as it supports AM3 or it supports AM4, either one will work with this, which is why I'm using the Akasa Venom A20 on this at the moment, as this one does support AM3 and therefore I'm using the AM3 holes in this motherboard. It's a very interesting design, and I'm actually quite glad they went with this because it means that older coolers can be supported without any of the upgrade kits that might, depending on who you ask, cost you some money. Now, of course, with this being an AM4 X370 motherboard, we do have some nice upgrades over the AM3 platform boards. Stuff like DDR4 support, also stuff like PCIe Gen 3.0, as well as reinforced PCI slots, and these ones are Asus's take on how to reinforce a PCI slot with this sort of metal built into the plastic. It's quite an interesting design. They claim that it's stronger than Gigabyte and MSI's versions, although I haven't tested that myself, so I'll leave that one up to you to kind of work out. But either way, there's some really nice new features on here. Taking a look along the right hand side of the board, you can see the debug LED display at the top. This is really useful if you're planning on overclocking, just to work out what went wrong, or if you're having any other issues, they're really useful. Just below that you have the 3D printing mount. They basically include, or you can download 3D printable files that allow you to do stuff like 24 pin covers and stuff like that. You can get obviously 3D print them or get someone like Shapeways to make it for you, and then attach it using some screws included in the box, so that's quite nice. Just below the 24 pin you have the USB 3.1 front panel header, which is one of the great new features about the board as well, and obviously while cases aren't quite supporting it just yet, it is still nice that these boards come ready with that. And then just below that you have your 8 SATA ports, which is actually quite hefty, especially when compared to the Z270 lineup, which normally has somewhere in the area of 6. Down at the bottom of the board you have a whole load of connections, including the usual USB 3.0 front panel header in case your case doesn't support a USB 3.1. You also have the ROG extension, a trusted partner module connector, which is it looks a bit smaller than the usual TPM connector, but either way that's fine. You also have the audio section to the left, obviously with the front panel header as well, and this is still a split PCB audio. It's the Supreme Effects setup, which actually sounds quite nice, and there's a lot of new features to do with that as well, so that one's quite cool. And either way, there's also a few LED connectors on here as well, one by the CPU socket for those new Wraith coolers with the RGB LEDs built into them, and then one down at the bottom for your usual Aura sync type stuff if you want to plug in some external LEDs to light up your case and have that sync with your motherboard. One thing I should note is that this motherboard uses an 8-pin and a 4-pin for your CPU power connectors up at the top left-hand corner. This, I believe, normally speaking, you can normally leave out that 4-pin, just plug in the 8-pin if you're not really heavily overclocking, but I generally recommend plugging them in anyway, especially if you are planning on overclocking. On the topic of overclocking, next to the 24-pin, in fact, basically on the 24-pin, you have some voltage checkpoints. So if you have a multimeter, you can read the voltage for your 12 volt, your 5 volt, your 3.3 volt, and your CPU core voltage and all that sort of stuff, which is really nice. It's very easy to access. So if you are planning on overclocking, that's a very nice thing to do. While we're on the topic, I should probably mention that I'm doing a full video on how to overclock these Ryzen CPUs tomorrow, and of course if you're watching this anytime in the future, that will already be on the channel for you, so feel free to take a look at that one if you want to know a sort of general look on how to overclock them and the Ryzen Master utility. But specifically talking about this board, it's actually really easy. There's auto overclocking settings available for you. You basically just click and it will auto overclock for you, or you can load the profiles. The 4 GHz profile seems like a quite stable one, so that's awesome. And of course you can just manually overclock yourself. It seems fairly simple, fairly easy to do. There's actually a lot of in-depth settings there as well if you're quite an advanced overclocker, so that's really awesome. And overall, speaking about the BIOS, it seems like a very nice detailed, fairly well laid out, fairly easy to use BIOS. I think I still prefer MSI's look and feel, but this one is probably second on my list for just how detailed, how easy it is to use, and all that sort of stuff. For me, aesthetics is something that ASUS likes to pay attention to, and it certainly shows on this board. I do quite like the overall style of it. Of course, they've got the RGB LEDs on the top sort of rear I/O cover, as well as inside the chips.
Secret agent coming through!
Right away.
Your soul is money!
What? They fell off the truck.
Right away.
Move or fly!
Has there ever been a better time to build your own PC? I mean, it's gotten to the point where DIY enthusiasts have used the phrase Lego for adults to describe how simple it's become. But nonetheless, there are still quite a few common pitfalls that the novice builder, and even some experienced ones, still fall into. So what are a few things that merit a little extra attention when picking parts or during the building process itself to save you a ton of headaches down the line? Well, since part of the reason that building PCs is easier these days is because components are becoming more and more power efficient, we will start with a tip on power supplies. Don't cheap out on your power supply. And I don't mean avoid a well-rated power supply from a reputable manufacturer just because it's on sale. If you can find such a deal, go for it. What I'm talking about instead is finding out that your rig only needs 250 or 300 watts of power and deciding it's okay to go for some bargain basement unit with questionable packaging from a brand you've never heard of. Way too often, these are made with cheap, unreliable components that can't even deliver the amount of power advertised without failing, sparking, or even explode. If that happens, not only will you be out whatever you spent on the PSU, it could also damage whatever you have plugged into it, meaning hundreds of dollars down the drain. But let's say you've gotten a nicer power supply anyway because you want a multi-GPU setup and you've made sure that the motherboard you picked has enough PCI Express slots to support multiple cards. You should be ready to go, right? Wrong! If you're going with NVIDIA SLI, the motherboard needs an SLI certification. So unless it specifically indicates it's compatible with the level of SLI you desire, it probably isn't, even if it has multiple PCI Express slots. But if you're more of an AMD fan and you want Crossfire, things will be a little easier for you, as Crossfire technology doesn't need anything other than the aforementioned PCI Express slots. So, you've got the right power supply and motherboard and are busying yourself getting everything installed in your case, and suddenly you hear a clattering noise. One of those tiny screws has slipped off your screwdriver and is trapped somewhere in your case, possibly under the motherboard. If this happens, don't be tempted to just leave it there and deal with it later. Metal screws conduct electricity, so if they touch the traces on the underside of your motherboard, they can cause electrical shorts that could permanently fry your system. In fact, part of the reason we use motherboard standoffs is to keep those traces from touching the metal part of the case, which prevents electrical mishaps. So make sure you retrieve those loose screws before turning anything on. And by the way, yes, you can use a magnetic screwdriver to do this, as the magnetic force is not great enough to damage your components, even hard drives. Finally, to round things out, here's one from the simple thing that's easy to forget department. Screw in your graphics cards. Many GPUs, especially higher-end models, are heavy enough to put a significant amount of torque on the PCI Express slot that they're plugged into. Fortunately, it's easy to avoid this simply by screwing the card bracket into your case. But this is very easy to overlook, which can actually lead to the card's weight ripping out the PCIe slot entirely. I have seen this, damaging both the card and forcing you to buy a whole new motherboard, which has happened to people when their GPU popped out when they were trying to plug in a cable. Now, there are some motherboards on the market with reinforced PCIe slots to help keep this from happening, but those can be pretty expensive, so the best thing to do is just be mindful of these little details so your dream rig doesn't turn into a nightmare. So what are some of the things that you wish you had known before building your first PC? Let us know in the comments. I'd also like you guys to be sure to like those useful comments so that we build up a little repository of computer building tips below this video for people to check out. Also, let us know if you'd like to see more computer building mistakes to avoid videos like this one. TunnelBear VPN lets you tunnel to up 20 different countries, allowing you to browse the internet and use online services as though you are in a different country. They have easy-to-use apps for iOS, Android, PC, and Mac. They also have a Chrome extension. And all you gotta do is choose a country in the app, turn the switch on TunnelBear, and watch as your bear tunnels your internet connection to your new location, which does a couple of things. Number one, your connection gets encrypted with AES 256-bit encryption, not encryption, it's the good kind of encryption. And two, your public IP address gets switched, so you show up as if you're from that other place. They also have a top-rated privacy policy, and they do not log user activity. You can try out TunnelBear VPN with 500 megs